Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today I'm going to give to you some of the best Christian comebacks I've heard. I've been listening to a lot of YouTube videos and I've compiled an awesome list, so stay tuned.
One is the idea of this fine-tuning, about which I've only left myself 3.5 minutes. I'll have to refer some of this to later in the discussion. This is essentially another form of pattern seeking on the basis of extremely limited evidence. Most physicists are very uncertain, as they have every right to be. In fact, I would say, for physicists, as they have the duty to be at the moment, extremely uncertain about the spatio-temporal dimensions of the original episode, the Big Bang as it's sometimes called. We're in the very, very early stages of this inquiry. We hardly know what we don't know about the origins of the universe. We're viewing it from an unimaginable distance, not just an unimaginable distance in space. We're perched on a tiny rock in an extremely small suburb of a fairly minor galaxy, trying to look to discern our origins, but also at an unbelievable distance in time. And we claim the right to say, we can see the finger of God in this process. It's an extraordinarily arrogant assumption. It either deserves a Nobel Prize in physics, which it hasn't yet got, I notice. I don't know any physicist who believes these assumptions are necessary, or it deserves a charge of hubris. Let me make 3 tiny, quick objections to it, as it stands, and I'm no more a physicist than most of you are. I'll make these lay objections. 1, was there pre-existing material for this extra spatio-temporal being to work with? Or did he just will it into existence, the ex nihilo? Who designed the designer? Don't you run the risk with the presumption of a god and a designer and an originator of asking, well, where does that come from, and locking yourself into an infinite regress? Why are there so many shooting stars, collapsed suns, failed galaxies we can see? We can see with the aid of a telescope, sometimes we can see with the naked eye. The utter failure, the total destruction of gigantic, unimaginable sweeps of outer space. Is this fine-tuning, or is it extremely random, capricious, cruel, mysterious, and incompetent? And have you thought of the nothingness that's coming? We know we have something now, and we speculate about what it might have come from, and there's a real question about ex nihilo, but nihilo is coming to us. In the night sky, you can already see the Andromeda Galaxy. It's heading straight for ours on a collision course. Is that part of a design? Was it fine-tuned to do that? We know that from the red light shift of the Hubble telescope, or rather Edwin Hubble's original discovery, the universe is expanding away from itself at a tremendous rate. It was thought that rate would go down for Newtonian reasons. No, it's recently been proved by Professor Lawrence Krauss. The rate of expansion is increasing. Everything's exploding away even faster. Nothingness is certainly coming. Who designed that? And that's all if before these things happen, we don't have the destruction of our own little solar system, in which already there's only one planet where anything like life can possibly be supported. All the other planets are too hot or too cold to support any life at all, and the sun is due to swell up, burn us to a crisp, boil our oceans and die, as we've seen all the other suns do in the night sky. This is not fine-tuning, ladies and gentlemen, and if it's the work of a designer, then there's an indictment to which that designer may have to be subjected. I'm out of time. I'm very grateful for your kindness and hospitality. Thank you.
So the first argument, it seems to me, is unrefuted. What about the fine-tuning argument? Here he said, well, scientists are terribly uncertain about the fine-tuning argument. Well, I think that's simply not the case. Sir Martin Rees, the Royal Astronomer Royal of Great Britain, has said, the laws governing our universe appear to be finely tuned for our existence. Everywhere you look, there are yet more examples. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. Ernest McMullen, philosopher of science, says it seems safe to say that later theory, no matter how different it may be, will turn up approximately the same numbers. And the numerous constraints that have to be imposed on these numbers seem both too specific and too numerous to evaporate entirely. So that it's very unlikely that this fine-tuning is going to vanish or be explained away. Now, Mr. Hitchens responds, but we're headed toward nothingness. We're ultimately going to be doomed, and therefore the universe is not designed. Well, now, this is not a very powerful objection. The temporal duration of something is irrelevant to whether it's been designed. The products of human intelligence and engineering, like computers and automobiles, will eventually decay and cease to exist, but that doesn't mean they weren't designed. I think the real objection he's getting at here is, why would God create mankind only to have it go extinct? But of course, you see, on the Christian view, that's false. That is an atheistic assumption. On the Christian view, life does not end at the grave, and God has given assurance of this by raising Jesus from the dead. So the objection simply has no purchase against Christian theism. So it seems to me that the fine-tuning argument is also unrefuted. What about the moral argument? We saw that without God, there are no objective moral values. Mr. Hitchens agrees with this, and yet he himself affirms over and over again moral statements, like the moral reprobation of religious intolerance and violence in the name of religion. So he does affirm objective values, but without any basis for it. What I can offer him as a theist is a transcendent basis for the objective moral values and duties that we both want to affirm.
This is a big one we get all the time, and you probably get it too. God is immoral for killing the Canaanites. Well, is God immoral for killing the Canaanites? The first question you're going to ask somebody is, if there is no God, why is any Old Testament atrocity wrong? Why? Because if they're coming from an atheistic perspective, they have no objective means to judge the God of the Bible as evil. Because, again, there's no evil unless there's a standard of good. But if they say, let me grant you there's God, why would such a God do such a thing? Fair question. Problem for us, apparently, right? So the next thing I normally ask is God arbitrary, or does he give reasons for judging people in the Old Testament? Is he just like kind of a cosmic mafia boss where he wakes up one day and he says, Canaanites, want them dead, kill them? Is that what he does? No. Does he give reasons for this? 400 years of this inequity, right? He's trying to warn them, get out of the land and stop these evil practices. In fact, who is this? Does anyone know who this is? I know Ted does. Who is this? Molech. That's Molech, right? One of their deities. And if you notice right here, Molech, you see the baby, you see the fire. They were sacrificing their babies to Molech. The baby sacrifice. Child sacrifice. They were also engaged in bestiality and all sorts of other abominable behaviors. And God is saying, stop this for 400 years. And they don't relent. They continue to do it. This culture gets so evil. Now, how many times, by the way, have you heard atheists say, why doesn't God stop all the evil? Like the guy at Michigan State. Why doesn't God stop all the evil? They complain that God doesn't intervene in the tsunami. God doesn't intervene in the, stopping Hitler. God doesn't intervene in whatever. God doesn't intervene. Why doesn't God intervene? And then here God intervenes and they're complaining about it. You notice that? God does intervene. He intervenes here and they're complaining about. Why complain that God doesn't stop evil but then complain when he does? Because
Bill claims that the best explanation of his 4 facts is that there is a miracle that happened. Hume, in fact, was not talking about what I'm talking about. Hume was talking about the possibility of whether miracle happens. I'm not talking about whether miracle can happen. I don't accept Hume's argument that miracles can't happen. I'm asking, suppose miracles do happen. Can historians demonstrate it? No, they can't demonstrate it. If Bill wants to flash up his mathematical possibilities again, then I suggest that he plug in other historical options. For example, the one that I've already laid out that he's ignored, that possibly 2 of Jesus' family members stole the body and that they were killed and thrown into a common tomb. It probably didn't happen, but it's more plausible than the explanation that God raised Jesus from the dead. Let me give you another explanation, just off the top of my head from last night, sitting around thinking about it. We have traditions from Syriac Christianity that Jesus' brothers, who are mentioned in the Gospel of Mark, one of whom was named Jude, were particularly close to Jesus, and that one of these brothers, Jude, otherwise known as Judas Thomas, was Jesus' twin brother. Now, I'm not saying this is right, but that is what Syrian Christians thought in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, that Jesus had a twin brother. How could he have a twin brother? Well, I don't know how he could have a twin brother, but that's what the Syrian Christians said. In fact, we have interesting stories about Jesus and his twin brother in a book called The Acts of Thomas, in which Jesus and his twin brother are identical twins. They look just alike, and every now and then, Jesus comes down from heaven and confuses people. When they've just seen Thomas leave the room, there he is again, and they don't understand. Well, it's because it's his twin brother showing up. Suppose Jesus had a twin brother. Nothing implausible. People have twins. After Jesus' death, Judas Thomas, like all others connected with Jesus, went into hiding and he escaped from Judea. Some years later, one of Jesus' followers saw Judas Thomas at a distance and he thought it was Jesus. Others reported similar sightings. Word spread that Jesus was no longer dead. The body in the tomb by that time had decomposed beyond recognition. The story became more widely accepted that Jesus had been raised from the dead, and in the oral tradition, more stories started up and told about the event, including stories about them discovering an empty tomb. That's an alternative explanation. It's highly unlikely. I don't buy it for a second.
In my opening speech, I remarked that there are really 2 avenues to a knowledge of Jesus' resurrection, the historical and the experiential. And tonight we've been primarily preoccupied with the historical. I've argued first that there are 4 historical facts which any adequate historical hypothesis must account for, and that second, the best explanation of those facts is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, I don't think that we've seen any of those 4 facts refuted today. The majority of scholars, in fact, do agree with the arguments that I gave for Jesus' honorable burial by Joseph of Arimathea, for the fact that the tomb was found empty, for the appearances of Jesus to various individuals and groups, and for the origin of the disciples' belief in Jesus' resurrection. Dr. Ehrman's dropped his argument based on the inconsistencies in the narratives, as I showed that those lie in the peripheral details, not at the heart of the narratives, and that we have a remarkable harmonious account of these 4 fundamental facts. His only point that remained in the last speech was with respect to the women's role. And again, I would simply suggest that as women disciples of Jesus who are faithful to Jesus and involved in his support and following him, they don't represent marginalized people. And besides that, is independently attested. This is not a marked feature, remember. We have multiple independent sources of the women's role in the discovery of Jesus' empty tomb. So what about that second crucial contention that the resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation? I showed how the argument based on probability that he gives over and over again in his written word is fallacious. And he says, well, Hume isn't talking about my argument. He's talking about the impossibility of miracles. That is simply mistaken. Hume's argument is against the identification of miracles based upon their improbability. And that doesn't answer my fundamental point that he cannot say the resurrection of Jesus is improbable, because he says the historian can't make judgments about that sort of thing. And even if it were improbable, he's got to consider all of the other evidence that would outbalance that. Now he says, well, look at these other hypotheses. Perhaps, for example, family members of Jesus stole the body. Isn't that more probable? Well, I don't think so. Notice there's no motive in that case for stealing the body. The family members of Jesus didn't believe in him during his lifetime. Nobody else other than Joseph and his servants and the women disciples even knew where the body had been interred. The time was insufficient for such a conspiracy to be hatched and launched between Friday night and Sunday morning. Also, the grave clothes in the tomb disproved the hypothesis of tomb robbery. Nobody would undress the body before taking it away. His conspiracies like this always come to light. His Roman guards would have been happy to inform the Jewish leaders of what had happened. And this hypothesis can't explain either the appearances of Jesus nor the origin of the Christian belief in his resurrection. So for all those reasons, that's an improbable hypothesis. By contrast, I don't think he's shown any improbability in saying God raised Jesus from the dead. All he says is that this appeals to God and that historians can't infer God. But remember, I gave three responses to that. First, as in physical science, you don't have to have direct access to explanatory entities in order to infer them. Secondly, the historian's whole project is dealing with the inaccessible past, where you have to infer things based on present evidence, even though you don't have direct access. And thirdly, this isn't a debate about what historians can do professionally. It's a debate about whether there's historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection and the conclusions that we can draw. And even if a professional historian can't draw that conclusion in a historical journal or a classroom, he can draw it when he goes home to his wife. And we can draw it if we think that the evidence is best explained in that way too. In short,
what you were just talking about, let me ask IP especially, why do not we see more people, when they lose their faith, we don't see a huge paradigm shift in their ethical standards and their morality and their framework of morals? We basically see them just lose their faith and they continue on their lives as they normally do. If what you're saying is true as far as these studies, would you not expect to see people that have lost faith to have a huge change in how they go about their daily lives and live their life morally or immorally?
Well, what foundation would that be from where you say that I mean, are you saying that, oh, I've seen people? Okay, well, that's great. I've seen people lose their faith too, and they're really good people. For example, I have a cousin, great fan of Matt Dillahunty. In fact, he was the first person who showed me Matt Dillahunty's stuff. He's a great father. He's a great husband. He's a great person. He's an atheist. So what? There are marginal cases. But overall, in society in general, we have to go on what science says. We just can't say, look, I have all these friends I have from my experience. I need to see something more than saying, look at this. Yeah, and again, there are people that do find other variables which cause them to get ethical behavior, for example. I'm not denying that. The question is what happens on society as a whole.
I have a problem with calling these marginal cases. I don't know what justification you can say that they're marginal cases if we're both acknowledging that there hasn't been either the time or the study to show the proper effects of secular humanism. It seems a little weaselly to just dismiss this as marginal cases. What if, as the world continues for religion to decline and the nuns, the NONEs, continue to increase, at what point do we get to recognize that it's no longer marginal? But the other aspect is, I can identify specific doctrines within religion which are harmful and wrong, which diminish the value of things, as I was talking about with hospitals and stuff. Has anyone identified values within secular humanism that risk poisoning good efforts in the same way that religion does?
Well, yeah, it's underlying. People have argued based on the underlying truth foundations that you could lead to nihilistic tendencies. Now, you obviously don't agree with that, but other people have disagreed, and I have talked to people who have become nihilistic because they become atheists.
I know lots of people who have. I'm not at all saying that that's not one of the potential outcomes.
Okay, well, then you acknowledge there is some risk factor as well. You said there was some risk factor with religion, and here you're acknowledging there's risk factor with secular humanism. So I don't see what you're trying to point out there.
There's nothing about secular humanist principles that leads to nihilism, but the fact that what I'm saying is that there are people who've left their religion who become nihilistic.
No, I was talking about being secular humanist. I'm talking about people who I've spoken to who were atheistic secular humanists, and they became very nihilistic. They became anti-natalist even. Sure,
but you can't say that their nihilism is caused by some principle of secular humanism.
So what you're saying is that when we are studying individuals, we should look at the multifactorial variables going into them and not just assume it's one variable causing it.
That's pretty much what I've said all night.
Then that's my point when it comes to attribution errors and blaming this stuff on religion.
And I think, that was my point with regard to attribution errors, with regard to giving religions credit for that, when in fact the good idea of, hey, let's feed the homeless is not in any way a required tenet of a religion. There are certainly... The difference is I actually have studies showing that it is causing that sort of stuff. You on the other hand, don't. So one of us has studies, one of us doesn't. We can yell attribution error back and forth, but I'm going on what the scientific study says. This is why I cited them, gave you the titles. I have a lot of the PDFs. You can look at them yourself. Yeah.
For instance, think of it this way.
Why is it not true?
It's not a case, if you're talking about good and evil, you don't need evil to know good. If you think about, say you have a flat plane.
You're absolutely right about that.
Think about you have a flat plane.
You don't need evil to know good, I agree with you. So you need good to know evil, though.
I don't think so either. If you have a flat plane, you can see like a hill, like an indentation on that flat plane. Now, the rest of that plane is not a valley. You don't need the valley to understand the hill. You just need the hill in comparison to what is neutral. So you can have evil compared to what is neutral. You can have good compared to what is neutral. You don't need the two extremes.
What would be your definition of evil?
My definition of evil? Well, that's a very broad thing. But if you're asking me, again, subjectively, anything I would say that unwarrantedly elicits human suffering or animal suffering to an extent.
Okay,
as well.
so that would imply that it's the opposite of human flourishing. So it's very difficult to define evil without reference to good.
Not necessarily. It's not. It may be the opposite of human flourishing, but it's also just the absence of no suffering. Not necessarily good, but no evil.
Okay,
I don't know if I'm getting my point across very well.
I think you're both doing a great job at representing your different sides. I guess the thing that I'm really interested in pulling out, though, just to bring us back to that racism example, is can you sort of say that would you say racism has always been wrong, was wrong in every culture, time and place where it was practiced in the past? Or can you not actually say that if you're a subjectivist?
I would say if we're assuming that human prosperity is a good thing, and by good we mean best for human prosperity, then yes, racism has always been wrong. Yes,
right,
but only on that assumption.
Yes,
which is an assumption
for the racist,
which is an assumption we all share. Maybe not the racist.
Yeah.
In fact, no. The racist does share the assumption that human prosperity is a good thing.
They may not. They may think my own prosperity is the best thing. I want to live a selfish life that disregards other people's preferences.
But if we did have a racist,
but the problem is, how do you? Again, all I'm saying is, and I think you're agreeing with me, is simply that there's no objective way of sorting between these different preferences people have. There's no actual sort of thing that says this is the correct way. We should all be, wanting this human flourishing.
It's a harsh reality. I don't like.
There's no way of grounding
it. It can make me uncomfortable. The idea that there is no objective, as far as I'm concerned.
And so, do you understand Frank's view here, which is? He sees that as such an obvious thing that you would have to the premises against that, if you like, would have to be much, much stronger than they are to take away his instinctive view that this is really actually an objective reality.
I understand entirely. Think about hunger. Hunger is within all of us, and it is such a strong thing. We if somebody is dying of starvation, that is all they care about. It is within them. But it's still a process of evolution. It's still a subjective psychological experience. It's not some kind of transcendental...
Hang on, Alex. Let me just ask you a question about that, because as Justin pointed out in his interview with
Richard Dawkins a number of years ago, which is, by the way, in the new book. Unbelievable.
I don't need a publicist when I've got Frank in the studio.
It's a great book. Justin rightfully said, well, you tell the story, Justin, about how you said he was stepping outside of the evolutionary process.
I kind of had this interesting conversation in my very first encounter with Richard Dawkins, and I asked him why, whether if all our morality is essentially a product of undirected evolution, whether he can really say that rape is wrong. And he says, well, I do believe rape is wrong. Now, that may be a product of my evolutionary past, but that's a value judgment I'm going to make. And I said, but how do you make that value judgment? You have to step outside of this evolutionary process to say that's wrong. And he said, well, maybe, but it doesn't show that anything supernatural exists. And I said, but as far as you're concerned, the fact that we've believed rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6. And he said, yes. Basically. And
I hope you've enjoyed these tidbits from various Christian apologists, and I also hope that you'll like and subscribe and come back again. Thank you so much. Again, this is Christian-apologist.com, and you can reach me on Twitter at LEAD Lead 1225.